So at this point in the show, I'm just sat in my seat. She's like here, and then she's here. I'm completely shook. The rest of the audience is shook, but in Portuguese. She's not here at this point, but hold on, where's the monkey? What I really need here is ensemble figurines. Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is MickeyJo, and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I am a professional and international theatre critic, and I can super say that in today's video because I just got back from Sao Paulo, Brazil, where I was flown over to see the non-replica production of Wicked. Lots to explain there, but if you don't know what Wicked is, A, have you been living under a theatrical rock? And B, it is the untold story of the Witches of Oz, based on the novel by Gregory Maguire, based on the character from L. Frank Baum's The Wizard of Oz. Wicked features a score by Stephen Schwartz and a book by Winnie Holtzman, and in the 20 years since it first premiered on Broadway, all of the productions around the world have all been exactly the same production, up until very recently. Because in the last few years, we have started to see what we call non-replica productions of the show. That is, the material is almost exactly the same, but it might have different sets, different costumes, a different director, a different choreographer, an entirely different approach to telling the same story. And because Wicked is such a complex show with so many different magical moving parts, that can allow for some really innovative and creative artistry. So there was a production not too long ago in Hamburg that I didn't get a chance to see, although I was fascinated by some of the choices that they made. There's a production that's going to be happening very soon in Sweden, and up until this weekend, there was a production in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and that is the one that I was flown down by the producers to go and review. So in today's video, I'm so excited to tell you that I'm going to be bringing you all of my thoughts about this version of Wicked. And yes, it was super different to the production of Wicked that you may have seen before on Broadway, in the West End, or even internationally. I'm going to be talking you through some of those changes and letting you know if I thought those changes improved the show and brought out more from the material that we haven't seen before, or didn't live up to the original version. Not only that, but we're going to talk about this unique theatre-going experience and the performances of the cast, including at least one character who I think was portrayed better in this version than I have ever seen them before. And you'll have to stay tuned to find out. But I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you do, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews, largely of West End and Broadway shows, but who knows? I'm very happy to travel internationally and go and see theatre wherever they will have me. Also, if you want to see my videos, including news videos, opinion pieces, interviews, and theatre-going vlogs before anyone else gets to, you can hit the link in the description and sign up to become one of my YouTube channel members. Now get ready to hear about what I thought of the Sao Paulo production of Wicked right after we hear about this video's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by AG1. AG1 is a nutritional supplement drink that I've been incorporating into my diet for a few weeks now. Amidst a really busy schedule, just knowing that I've been able to find a really easy way of taking positive nutritional steps has been hugely anxiety reducing for me. But that's not the only reason why. AG1 contains several ingredients that help support brain health, like vitamin B6, vitamin B12, magnesium, folate, green tea extract, and many more. It also includes vital adaptogens that act to support adrenal health and recovery when the mind needs stress management from burnout or overworking. It has huge benefits when it comes to supporting digestion regularity and gut health, immune health, healthy aging, and nutrient replenishment. It also contains no artificial additives, herbicides, pesticides, GMOs. It's gluten-free, egg-free, nut-free, and contains no added sugar. I love how quick and easy it is to make. All you need to do is take 1 scoop of the product and combine it with 250 milliliters of cold water. AG1 provides 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food source nutrients in 1 convenient daily serving. To be completely honest, I was a little dubious about how this was going to taste when I first tried it, but it tastes nothing like it looks. It's a pretty mild flavour that's really easy to drink. For all you musical theatre fans, you can just pretend you're drinking a green elixir from Wicked, only this one isn't going to give your children magical powers. Or turn them green. I promise. So if you're someone who can't really change your busy lifestyle too much but wants to experience all of the health benefits that come with this product, click on the link in the description. And with your first purchase of AG1, you can get a free 1-year supply of AG vitamin D3 and K2 plus 5 AG1 travel packs. Check it out for yourselves and let me know what you think. So like I said, this is a really different version of the show. I don't know if I'm going to be able to talk through every single change in this video. If anyone is deeply fascinated, comment down below if you want me to do a video where I talk through literally every single difference. I know I made one not too long ago where I talked about the minute and minuscule differences between the Broadway and West End productions of the show, because there's a couple of things that they do differently in London versus New York, but that all seems very trivial now compared with such a different version of the show. Some big picture information first of all about the show. It is still wicked. The material is much the same. And yes, the whole thing was performed in Portuguese. And no, I do not speak Portuguese. But you would be surprised. I think I've seen Wicked maybe 10 times in my life. I've seen it in London, I've seen it on Broadway, and from this performance I realised I know Wicked well enough to follow it line for line, to the point that at about 4 moments during the show they added in just an extra line, like a topical reference. I'll tell you more about those later, and I was able to tell you that we had gone off script because I'm following through and there's enough similarity in a handful of verbs, and every so often a name will come back around, and then we get to a line where that character's said one too many things, or someone else has spoken who doesn't usually, and I'm thinking, this is different, but for the most part I was able to follow the whole thing pretty succinctly. And so if you're waiting for me to tell you that it's a good show or a bad show, it's the same show. This is the same material. The material shines through in the same way. It sounds almost exactly the same with a couple of little differences, but broadly the same kind of instrumentation and orchestration because Stephen Schwartz is still very much involved in all of that. You still get these tremendous vocals that Wicked has always been known for. In terms of me reviewing the content of the show, it's the same show that I've seen before. It's exactly as good as the West End production, as the Broadway production, as the tours always have been. What we're going to focus on in this review is the differences, the choices they've made specifically to separate this production from the original version aesthetically, in terms of characterizations, in terms of staging and choreography choices, in terms of storytelling moments, and how those have impacted the show. So if you're waiting for a star rating, I don't think I've ever actually given Wicked a star rating, but as a musical, as material, I think it sits somewhere between a 4 and a 5. And I think really great performances can win you over so much that you can have a 5-star experience. But like I said, it's the same show in London, in Broadway, and in Sao Paulo. This one just does things a little bit differently. Now, with the design choices, I think the ones that excited me the most are the ones where they went in this really different and original and unique direction. There's a lot of great costuming. Madame Morrible, I think, is one of the best costumed characters in this show when she enters in this amazing purple ensemble with this exciting purple wig, the styling of which reminded me just a little bit of the way that the wigs were styled in the London Palladium production of The Wizard of Oz in 2011, where they didn't have like witches' hats for the witches, but they had the wigs styled in this sort of a pointy way. Madame Morrible has a little bit of that going on, a little bit of hair cone right there on the head. I also like her Act 2 outfit. However, for such a fashionable character, she's not going to be an outfit repeater, and I wish she had a few more costume changes in the first act, which I know equals money and designs, but this is Madame Morrible we're talking about. When we see her going from head shizdress at Shiz University to then becoming press secretary for The Wizard of Oz in the Emerald City, she can't be wearing the same outfit. Days, weeks, months have passed. She cannot wear that one purple dress every day. Like I said, I like the switch of the outfit in the second act. I just wish she had a few more costumes, because that's one of my favourite things about the show's original costume design, is getting to see Madame Morrible gradually evolve as a character, like they all do in this show. One of the big changes with this production is that Glinda is back in pink rather than in blue. She resembles more closely Glinda in the Wizard of Oz film in this pink bubble dress. It's another beautiful gown. I got to see it up close. It's really stunning. Morgan Large designed the costumes and the set design for this production, by the way, and I enjoy the sort of a scroll motif that she has on her dress. It's like two scrolling pieces of fabric that are coming out of the bodice. I do think when we get her thank goodness dress in the second act, it looks just a little bit more like a generic ball gown. It's not so much a fantasy outfit as something you could just happily wear to like an inaugural ball. It just wasn't giving me Oz. But I like the attention to detail in a lot of these costumes, with the Shiz costuming, rather than them being in the blues and the greys and the whites, we're using burgundy as a colour, and in comparison with the other students, Elphabas outfit has like holes in, it's a little bit tattered and torn, because even though she comes from a family of a certain class, she is very much neglected in comparison to her sister, who is obviously treated much better by their father. And Glinda gets this lovely little pink stripy outfit with like a boater hat. I also like that Elphaba's hemlines are falling sort of mid-shin. She doesn't look too matronly. I like that when we get her darker version of her witch's outfit in the second act, that she has one sleeve that's a little bit sheer. Some of the texture on that dress is super interesting. I like the ensemble costuming when they go to Oz with all the different variants of green. And I think in terms of the costume, it does a really good job of presenting you this different but still recognizable version of Oz, because we ultimately can't step too far away from the Wizard of Oz of it all. It still has to look like that same place that everyone is going to arrive with a certain expectation and familiarity with. With the set design, however, there were some bits I really loved, and there were other moments where I thought we were still just a little too tightly tethered to the original design. Because when you go to see the original production of Wicked, what you will see is all of these cogs and stairwells framing the stage, all this little bit steampunky, little bit like copper and wood tones, and some massive cogs coming out of the front of the set, and the big dragon atop the whole thing, the Time Dragon clock. Now, even though the Time Dragon clock is barely mentioned in the script, and I don't know what is implied by the rights or what is implied by the actual early pages of the script in terms of the setting of the show, whether a dragon must be there at the beginning, we still have a dragon featuring at the start of this show, but the way the dragon is created is quite innovatively done. We have a sort of a canvas wing that has come across the front of the stage rather than the map of Oz. That's what we get. And we have a couple of cages with orbs in that become the dragon's eyes that blink and shut and look around, and the rest of the dragon's face is projected onto that wing. It's a very clever way of conjuring a dragon on stage without having this massive dragon set piece that barely gets used. Cages are actually a design motif for this production. Rather than having cogs all around the outside of the set, we have a series of cages. It's still sort of rusty looking and metallic and wood tones. You would be able to tell that this is still Wicked from looking at it. It's just a different version of Wicked. Now, I think using cages as imagery is an interesting choice because it plays up on the whole animal rights aspect of all of it. I think too often that gets lost in Elphaba's narrative, that's really her impetus going into the second act, that she alienates herself completely from society and sacrifices her chance to have everything she's ever wanted, to do what is right and help save the animals of Oz who are being scapegoated and mistreated by a corrupt wizard. Spoiler alert, by the way, if you haven't seen the show. Although there does come a sticky moment in the script during the first act in a scene in Shiz where a cage is brought on and the line happens, this is called a cage, you're going to be seeing a lot more of them. And I'm thinking we've been looking at them for the past 45 minutes because they're everywhere. My favourite thing about this proscenium design, though, is that it has little screens. There is a screen at the back of the whole thing that creates different locations. Different set pieces are brought in front of that, so we're not purely relying on a screen to create location, but it's just sort of embellishing detail, which I like. It's a good way of using screens. Technology as a feature of contemporary set design, that's something we can't really get away from. It's just here now. But if we're going to use screens, I like that we're not being completely reliant on them. Now, there are also screens dotted about in various cages, but that really doesn't get acutely revealed until a very exciting moment towards the end of the first act. After Elphaba casts a levitation spell on Chistery, the wizard's monkey, we suddenly get this reveal where we see all these other flying monkeys in cages, and they appear magically via the screens in the cages around the proscenium, and that's a really great choice. That makes the whole design element pay off as far as I'm concerned. In terms of the way that Shiz is designed, it's a little bit Hogwartsy from the Harry Potter world, and I think it probably is difficult to conceive of a magical school that looks different to the magical school that they did in the original one, while also avoiding the Harry Potter of it all. But we got a lot of like magical enchanted never-ending staircases and books. Morgan Large likes using books in design elements. I've noticed this before. He did this in Newsies, and I enjoy the arches made out of books and the desks made out of books, and that was all very whimsical and very magical. I just wish it had looked a little less Harry Potter. They even have a crest at one point that comes down with animals, which I get Harry Potter didn't invent that, but when you're already talking about a magical boarding school and you show us that kind of a crest, it's going to invite that comparison, I think. In lieu of the bridges that used to come down before, they have a couple of mobile step units that get to turn around to different orientations, and they create a lot of different configurations of those. Those are used to very good effect. We also have some great set pieces that are brought on for the numbers Defying Gravity and No Good Deed. We get this big round window that appears atop a staircase in Defying Gravity, and we get this big round portal that Elphaba stands atop of in No Good Deed when she's doing magic, and we can see things projected onto a screen in the portal. Those numbers in the previous production were both pretty bare, so it was a nice contrast having something more exciting to look at while they're singing those great songs. The one scene that keeps playing on my mind as being a little too tethered to the original production, like I said before, is Dancing Through Life and Fiero's first entrance. Now, this is a direction thing as well, because this could be staged any which way. Fiero's arrival, he pulls up in a carriage, so you'd assume outside from that, and that's fine. But in both productions, we have a statue right in the middle of the stage, and he dances around, he interacts with the students, he interacts with the statue, and it's just very similar in both productions. I feel like we could have stepped further away from the original with the Dancing Through Life Fiero arrival. Admittedly, they've changed the statue from being a dude to being an owl, but that felt like one of those changes where they just thought, oh, we have to change this for the sake of changing it, rather than, you know what really makes sense for this version of the show? Owls. Owls will be a big thing. I dare say I have more comments on some of the design choices because, like I said, just so many changes, but I will try and pop those in as and when they come up discussing other things. There's a lot to get through in this review. So let's talk about the scenes where I think they actually improved on the original version, which is a hell of a claim. Wicked has been this huge global sensation of a musical, and I'm saying this other little version in Sao Paulo, Brazil, might actually have made it better in a couple of places. I stand by that completely. I'm going to tell you which scenes they were. So the first one I absolutely have to tell you about was the whole Defying Gravity sequence. And I got to speak with the producers about this show, and they were very eager that it was important for Elphaba to fly over the audience, just like Mary Poppins does, like has happened in other shows before, but that they've never quite managed to do in the musical Wicked, and that when she does that, she should be flying on the broom. Now, I have seen witches flying on brooms before in that same 2011 production of Wizard of Oz that I mentioned at the London Palladium. They had the Wicked Witch of the West descending from a skylight and lowering down in front of the dress circle and over the stalls, but admittedly, Hannah Waddingham, who was playing that role, did not have to sing Defying Gravity at the same time. And this is what has always posed a challenge, because logistically, you can fly a green woman over an audience of people, but having her belt as high as she has to while doing that is going to be tricky. And yet, they have found a way to make it work in Sao Paulo, because what happens in Defying Gravity, and this is a staging spoiler, albeit for a recently closed production, when she starts going, I'm not the one you want, it's me. Excuse me, hold on. It's me. And she flies up astride a broomstick, and she's just being flown via cables, a different way to the way that they do it normally in Wicked, which is she's standing on a little square of something, she gets clipped in, and she just goes up on a big mechanical arm like she's in a cherry picker. But no, in Sao Paulo, she's on the broom, she's holding the broom, she gets flown up, and then she rises up this window set piece, she comes up in front of it, it breaks apart. It would be cool if she could fly through the window rather than coming in front of it and then just flying forwards. They have done this before in Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Diane Pilkington flew through a window, but I get it. In any case, she starts to fly forwards, she flies out over the audience, flies as far forwards as row H, where I happened to be sitting, right in the middle. She appeared above me, started to lower down towards me until she was like, it felt like 6 feet above my head. It was probably further, but I was so mesmerized I couldn't count at that moment. And meanwhile, I'm so transfixed by the fact that this green woman is lowering towards me, pointing at me while singing the Portuguese version of Nobody in All of Oz, no wizard that there is or was, that I didn't notice the ensemble who are about to run out and fill this central horizontal aisle in the stalls section where I'm sitting, not unlike the recent semi-immersive production of Newsies at Troubadour Wembley Park in London, where they're going to then yell at her and ensemble vocal her back towards the stage, where she then goes back into darkness, ending the first act. I mean, Defying Gravity has always been a sensational moment of theatre, and I think when it was first done on Broadway, when I first saw it in the West End in 2006, it was mesmerising and captivating. And the first time I ever saw it from the front stalls, which I think was in 2018, it blew my mind all over again, being that close, her being that high up. But increasingly, when I see it now, I know what happens, and it's still cool and it's still awe-inspiring, especially to people who are seeing the show for the first time. But this Brazilian version of Defying Gravity is better. I'm sorry, but it's better. Elphaba flying out over the audience, flying atop the broom, lowering down towards you. I mean, it blew my entire mind. That's everything that she should be doing at that moment in the show. And having her rise up above them all, like, she looks very powerful. It's a great visual metaphor of her rising into the sky, but it doesn't feel so much like flying as this one does. There's something about someone flying. There's a reason that Mary Poppins flying over the audience always gets delightful applause, because it's just captivating to watch. It's breathtaking and it's magical and it's a little bit unbelievable. So I'm going to say that Sao Paulo's Defying Gravity is the best staging of Defying Gravity that I think has been done. But that's not the only scene, because in the second act, when Elphaba goes to visit Nessa Rose, who has become the governor of Munchkinland, this whole sequence was so good. This is a sequence, I like the song in the original version of the show, but I could give or take the way that it's staged. It's fantastic here. Every single second, they have found so much. So first of all, Bock wheels on Nessa Rose in this metallic chair with a little grate and a lantern hanging above it. Elphaba then appears in the darkness. There's no wardrobe to speak of. She just magically appears out of the darkness, throws a bit of fire out of her hands. That's something that happens in this production. They do a handful of illusions where Elphaba, when she does her magic, she throws flames, which is cool. Then they have a little bit of a back and forth. Elphaba decides to cast a spell on Nessa Rose's shoes, which, having been silver when they were presented to her, like in the book, turn ruby red like in the film. She's then wearing red slippers. And what I loved about this, which was so extra but I was so here for it, is the actress playing Nessa Rose is also a terrific dancer. And where the shoes get enchanted and come to life, she didn't just get out of the chair by going, oh, my shoes are leading me forwards. She kicked her feet up above her head to place each one of them down, stumbled across and did a very balletic fall to the ground. Elphaba goes to help her and she's like, no, Elphaba, don't help me. But in Portuguese. Gets up onto her feet and again, kicking above her head, doing these amazing little awkward walky things like her feet have been enchanted. Very convincing, very clever, and it was nice to see a dance getting used in that way for that character who has been sitting in a wheelchair up to this point in the show. You would never think to cast a dancer in that role because they spend so much of the show sitting down, but it really pays off with that sequence. And it made it feel much more like the shoes themselves were magical rather than Nessa Rose just suddenly being able to walk now. But that's not all. When Bock comes back and clumsily reveals that he's still in love with Glinda, and Nessa Rose accidentally tries to kill him by magicking away his entire heart, Bock is centre stage, now sat in this metallic chair with the lantern and the grate, remember that, and sort of clutching his chest like, oh god, I'm dying. Elphaba's doing magic on one side of the grimoire, and Nessa Rose sings Wicked Witch of the East, falls to her knees, and does some actions that sort of mimic Elphaba on the other side, like, look at us, we're both witches, I'm just as bad as she is. Which is what the lyrics are implying at that point, so it's clever. That's an attention to detail in the material when it comes to making these staging choices. Good on director John Stefaniuk. And then finally, we end with a Bock transformation that is so much better than the original version. So in the original, Elphaba wheels Bock behind a big screen, and then a double, who has been made up to look like the Tin Man, walks out from one side of the screen and lip syncs while the Bock actor fills in a little bit of dialogue. It's a bit clumsy, but how else do you turn a Munchkin into the Tin Man while still on stage? It's a very difficult illusion to create. So with this one, while we don't see him completely like fully head to toe silver and Tin Man up, we see him in the chair throughout the whole magical sequence. We can see him the whole time, and then he starts to stumble forward. There's a reveal with a tearaway where he is dressed underneath in more of a Tin Man-y outfit. He falls back into the chair, the grate falls down onto his chest, the lantern falls down onto his head, and you can see the essence of the Tin Man costume. I think that's so clever. It's taking a really challenging tall order and finding an innovative and artistic solution. I loved every bit of that. Some other little moments that I enjoyed. We got more of the day-to-day of Shiz in this production when they're singing What Is This Feeling rather than just choreographing their way around the stage. At one point we have them in a science class where Elphaba and Glinda are forced to be lab partners. They combine some chemicals. There's a big puff of green smoke. It's a metaphor for the early toxicity of their friendship. There's also 3 really brilliant choices I want to tell you about with regards to the Emerald City. So when they start singing One Short Day in the Emerald City, but in Portuguese, Elphaba and Glinda get into this umbrella basket. Now I will say, you can see the umbrella basket being flown in from the side. Just something has gone wrong there with a design, because that's nobody's intention for you to be able to see a set piece that's flying in. Nobody wants that. The creatives don't want that. The audience don't want that. And so I was a little bit just like, please don't let me be seeing this basket as it's flying in. But they brought the basket down. They have the balloon on the screen in the background. That's a pretty good indicator of how they tend to use that screen. It sort of embellishes detail on existing set pieces. But they both step into the basket. They get flown into the air and they fly in a balloon to Oz. That's cool, that's magical, that's more exciting than them going via train. We can all take trains, but travel by balloon, much more magical. Now when they get to Oz, rather than having the 3 wizard heads jumping around in the Wizardmania sequence, one of whom is Nessarose, by the way, fun fact, we have a slightly different version of the show and this really cool giant wizard head set piece that comes down with a big curtain. But my favourite part of all of this is when they go to meet the wizard himself. Rather than this big mechanical robot head with the green flashing eyes, we have like this old Zoltar like amusements booth guy. So we have a booth, we have an ensemble member stood inside who is made up to look like the wizard, but he's playing an animatronic version of the wizard so well. I think, having looked at pictures, that it's Danilo Santana from the ensemble. Apologies if I'm crediting the wrong cast member, but mesmerizingly good performance. I was just transfixed on this one guy pretending to be an animatronic. The way he was isolating different movements and his head and his eyes just so rigidly. It's a really cool and slightly retro and nostalgic way of portraying the facade of The Wizard of Oz. Also, going back to costume and design, which I knew that I would, when Chistery gets turned into a flying monkey, his eyes glow green, which is terrifying, but so cool. So those were all the areas where I thought the new choices really improved on the existing material and brought out things that we hadn't seen before. I'll tell you more about that when I talk about the performances. But let me now tell you some of the areas where I thought it didn't quite live up to the original version. Now, this is no huge criticism, because I do think the original direction by Joe Mantello is actually terrific. I think there's a lot of underrated storytelling in what he does, and because we've all seen it so many times, you can take a lot of it for granted, but it's very clever. And there are subtleties in what he does, like in the opening when we never really see the wizard's face. Now, it's obviously an ensemble member playing a younger version of the wizard in this flashback when he's doing his "Have another drink, my dark-eyed beauty," but there's something to the fact that he's choreographed upstage and facing away from us, so we don't see his face directly, and we don't get that in this version. I will say again, there were points where I really wanted them to commit more to being a unique and new version of the show. When we first see Dr. Dillerman's classroom in that first scene where he's introduced, everything is on the diagonal and he is teaching from a board that is stage right, sort of mid-stage right, and all the desks are diagonally facing towards him. But when we have the next scene in his class where he is revealing to the pupils that he is about to be escorted away from Shiz and there isn't much time and they're not being told the whole story, for some reason that's not what his classroom looks like anymore, and they revert to the original staging, which is to have the students split between 2 sides and Dillerman in the middle, exactly like in the original production. And maybe I care too much about this, but I did used to be an educator, and if I know one thing, it's that students appreciate consistency in a classroom layout. You try starting a lesson where you've just moved all of the desks into a different orientation, you bet there will be questions about it. Skipping ahead to the second act, Thank Goodness is one of my favourite songs in Wicked. I think getting to see that level of vulnerability and depth from Glinda's character, who really up until this point in the show has just been a comic and vapid, self-indulgent narcissist. Thank Goodness is the first time where she reveals more of herself, and we come to understand that even though she's putting on a brave face, she does have regrets and indecision about the role that she is playing in all of this. And I think there is a value in the stillness of the original production, because really what's happening in the lyrics is she's not actually saying it. In this one, all of the ensemble freeze around her and they sort of move to the back of the stage so she can turn away from them and sing Thank Goodness down to the audience while not singing to the citizens of Oz. Dramatically speaking, it makes the whole thing an aside. But the lyrics aren't an aside. The lyrics her being able to let us, the audience, know how she really feels without giving anything away to the townspeople. She's very reluctant to come out and say it. And if they're in a freeze frame and she's turning away from them, then there's no reason that she couldn't just be like, I'm actually really not sure about this. I have regrets about letting Elphaba go. She could just come out and sing all of her feelings, but she doesn't. The lyrics imply that she's still trapped within this prison of her own reputation and image. When she's singing, there's a kind of a sort of cost. There's a couple of things get lost. There are bridges you crossed you didn't know you crossed until you crossed. She's not coming right out and saying it. So there's no reason for a staging to have her completely move away from the townspeople. And I think that's a little subtle nuance that maybe was forgotten. Like I'd said before, there are some design moments and staging moments where we're just doing something different for the sake of it being different, as long as your mind is still just Elphaba and Fiyero alone on stage, as it would be, like as it should be, but rather than having them centrally, they're just a little bit stage right. At the end of that scene, we have the tornado moment that brings Dorothy's house to the world of Oz, landing on Nessarose. I like that we actually see Nessarose in this version. We have, again, Nessarose, who is a dancer in this production. She does a little bit of an interpretive dance. We have another ensemble member who plays the tornado, who is holding a house, and there's another bit of interpretive movement. I like that we have Nessarose in that moment because I think it's very easy to forget about her in this piece of storytelling because we know the Wizard of Oz so well. So we're just like, oh yeah, the house falls on the other witch, and we don't connect it with the Nessarose that we met at the beginning of the show. So they're clever to put her back into that moment. However, with the interpretive dance ensemble member playing the tornado storytelling of it all, I like that style of theatre. I do. I like that style of storytelling, but I like it most when it's consistent, and it's not something we've been using throughout the show. It happened at the beginning when Glinda is sitting in her bubble, yes, sitting in this version, and the ensemble are at her feet. Different members of Elphaba's backstory pop up, and they create the story that Glinda is telling amongst the ensemble there at the beginning, and the ensemble sort of spectate Elphaba's birth around her mother in labour. But my issue is that those two moments do not theatrical consistency make. Finally, the only other real issue I have is the Elphaba's alive after all reveal, where Fiyero goes to find her in the castle and he says it worked. He doesn't look super scarecrowy. He looks like a guy who's dressed as a scarecrow for Halloween because we don't have any kind of facial prosthetics or makeup, but that's fine, I can deal. The bigger issue I have is that he goes and just appears with her on a balcony right at the side of the stage around the proscenium. She doesn't appear out of a trapdoor, she sort of saunters on from one side. And like, coming out of a trapdoor never told us the whole story about how she faked her own melting, but just walking in from the wings tells us even less. There's not much magic to it, there's not much excitement around it, it's just like, oh hey, I'm still here. Okay, let's talk about a few of these performers specifically. I'm going to issue a blanket apology for any of the Brazilian names that I butcher while I'm reading them out of this program. Myra Ruiz and Fabi Bang played Elphaba and Glinda, delivering you all of the vocals that you would expect and the characterizations that you would expect, with a couple of subtle differences. Glinda is such an interesting one, because Glinda, I think, changes wildly from country to country, even in the replica production, because on Broadway, Glinda is a lot more manic and high energy, and in the West End, because she is portraying more of a posh boarding school type of girl, she's a lot more demure and reserved. So in Brazil, I think we had maybe even more of a manic Glinda energy than I've ever seen before. Fabi Bang was hilarious and hyper. She has this affectation with her voice where she's just kind of like, ah. It's a kind of a vocal affectation that she delivers a lot of her line readings with, and especially in the No One Wants the Wicked part with all of the dialogue when she's getting interrupted by the citizens of Oz, and she's just acting increasingly more annoyed that they're bothering her with these questions. It's very funny. And in Popular, her comedy takes on a whole nother life of its own. She does one or two little improvisations, some of which are specific nods to Brazilian culture, others of which were nods to the Barbie movie that is huge and everywhere right now, including Brazil, to the point that Elphaba runs off and does a whole like, I have to go, I can't deal with the fact I might be beautiful, and Glinda is looking in the mirror, and Fabi at that point in the show added in, hi Barbie, hi Barbie, hi Barbie, which was very topical, very funny. Now, when the wizard later did that in the second act, when he's consoling Glinda, who's just found out that Fiyero and Elphaba are running away together, when he said to her, hi Barbie, I don't know if that was a little too much a departure from the realism of the story, but people laughed, so what do I know? I loved that her Glinda acknowledged everything from the beginning. This is something you kind of occasionally see flashes of it in the original production, that when she's singing No One Wants the Wicked, you're kind of looking, if you know the show, for Glinda to acknowledge in her face or the way that she's saying things like goodness knows the wicked die alone. Like, is she sad at this point? Is she letting us know that she's sad? Fabi Bang is absolutely portraying Glinda's awareness of it all at the beginning of that. And I think it still works. I don't think it's a spoiler to the audience. I think, if anything, if you don't know the show and you don't know Elphaba and Glinda's relationship, it will just invite curiosity. Like, there's a sadness behind what Glinda is saying. Why is that? And you'll find out by the end of the show. But she's like clutching her heart and trying to get through it right from the off. Over to Myra Ruiz, who not only belts defying gravity while being suspended from the ceiling clutching a broomstick. Like, that alone is impressive enough to me. But she really has a juvenile quality as a young Elphaba. Some of them can come in feeling a little too old. And yes, Elphaba is a very serious character and a very repressed character, but she's still believably youthful and hot-headed with this interpretation, which I really enjoy. And she has a sense of fun and comedy throughout. It is hard to find the comedy moments as Elphaba, but she has them. And even though I don't speak Portuguese, I can hear good comic timing in her line readings. When she's lightly making fun of Fiyero, he says, "You must think I'm really stupid," and she's saying, "No, not really stupid." Just the way she delivered that I thought was brilliant. But not only that, we see a real transformation into wickedness in the second act, which again I think is something that people either forget or sometimes just completely get wrong about Wicked. We're not retconning everything from The Wizard of Oz, we're showing you the explanation behind it. She still becomes this wicked witch and she still becomes angry and malevolent, but these are all of the reasons why. So when we see her having an altercation with Glinda in the cornfield, when we see her performing no good deed, she has really grown resentful and angry, and I love that. Now, if you didn't know, these two actresses have both previously played Elphaba and Glinda opposite each other in the replica version of the show, so they're bringing with them to this performance this fantastic chemistry and this warmth between the two characters, which makes it even more special. Let's talk about some of the supporting cast now. So I saw two different Fiyeros because the principal actor playing Fiyero had to leave during the interval. Tiago Barbosa was his name. I really enjoyed his performance in the first act. And then in the second act, Robson Cabello, who was the understudy, went on to play Fiyero. I enjoyed his performance as well. They were quite distinct, which is, it's sort of tricky. And Fiyero is a character that really changes from the first act to the second, so they did just feel like completely different people, because they were. Diva Mena played Madame Morrible. I thought she was terrific. The best Morrible vocal I've ever heard. Now, I don't go to Wicked for a great Morrible vocal, but it's a fun surprise while you're there to hear the Madame Morrible lines sung so thrillingly. Still portraying all of this diva attitude and this power and this authority, and still growing more and more sinister as the show progresses. I do kind of wish, as much as I liked the choice, to have her big speech about catching Elphaba broadcast on screens to the citizens of Oz with a Defying Gravity sequence that was clearly pre-recorded. It does make me sad that I didn't get to see this particular actress performing it live, because I think with the passion with which she delivered all of the rest of her lines, I would have loved to have seen and heard what is really the defining moment of a Madame Morrible's arc, with her getting to do this Citizens of Oz speech. A really fun, while completely incidental fact is that Diva Mena is also a trans woman of colour playing this role, which is really boundary breaking. She's not the first trans woman to be playing Madame Morrible, but the fact that they're doing this even in Brazil, when the Wicked London cast I don't think has been at all trans inclusive. Happy to be corrected if I'm wrong about that, but it's fantastic, especially in a place where theatre culture is still blossoming and growing, to see fantastic trans performers included at the highest level in principal roles. Because she can give you the goods. She was fantastic in this role. Perfectly cast, in fact. Marcello Medici was playing the Wizard of Oz. He was charming. He had the showmanship. There was one particular way that he delivered one of his lines in Wonderful that got a spontaneous round of applause, because he was kind of nodding to a previous Brazilian leader. Cleto Bacic, whose name I'm probably mispronouncing. I'm so sorry to all of these actors. He was playing Dr. Dillamond. I enjoyed his performance. They really made a lot more out of the moment when Dr. Dillamond and Elphaba are sharing a lunch and he's eating the paper from hers, and he's even encouraging her to try the paper. She tries the paper. She doesn't love the paper because she's not a goat. I liked the way that he had been costumed. It's better in photos than in the show, because you do just see the glimpses of skin around his mouth. I don't know if they could have done something more with makeup just to disguise that a little bit more, but I liked his characterizations. Very goat-like, very believably goat-like, which is what I look for in these people. Dante Paccola was playing Bock. Very sweet, very endearing, very passionate in his Act 2 sequence. I don't know if this production really allowed Bock to come to the forefront as much as in the previous one. He just didn't jump out at me as a character in those early shiz scenes. as much as he had done before, possibly because I was very intrigued by the casting of Fanny and Shen Shen, Glinda's two friends, who were used very effectively during those early scenes and seemed to be cast with one male and one female performer. I could be very wrong about this, I don't know the gender identities of every single member of this cast, but if so, that's a similar choice to the one that is being made for the upcoming film adaptation. And finally, I want to talk about Nayara Venancio, who was playing Nessarose, who I'm going to tell you is the best Nessarose I have ever seen. Huge statement, right? Enormous. First of all, you have all of the beautiful dance that was incorporated into this production, but just from a vocal standpoint, she has this sort of a Alicia Keys, Catherine Parr type of a voice. It was soulful. It didn't sound like other Nessaroses have sounded before. And I want to talk in depth here about this vocal tone, because it suddenly made me question why Nessarose has had to sound like this. Why is it necessary for Nessarose to sound sort of like an Elphaba light, to the point where the actress playing Nessarose has previously been a second cover for Elphaba, to the point where the same ensemble actress can understudy Elphaba and Nessarose? There is a clear difference in vocal tone and timbre between Elphaba and Glinda. Why is Nessarose sounding so much like Elphaba? Is it because they're both witches? Is it because they're sisters? I get that for sure, but when Nessarose has nowhere near the strength or the conviction that Elphaba has, why should she have such a piercing and strong belt? Rather than portraying strength and defiance, Nayara's soulful voice and like subtle riffing was giving me like an anxiousness and a vulnerability that's much more in line with Nessarose's characterization. And I'm all for there being a greater variety of different types of voice. I think everything is increasingly in contemporary musicals starting to sound very similar. That is in a large part because of Wicked. Wicked has had such a huge influence on how musicals have sounded since the early 2000s. I like the idea of a different voice type singing Nessarose, and she sounded beautiful. The characterization was there, the dance, the singing, perfect. And those have been all of my thoughts about Wicked in Sao Paulo. Like I said, if you want me to talk through more of the changes, including some other things they put in specifically for Brazilian audiences that I haven't mentioned in this review video, put a comment down below. If you've seen this production, let me know what your thoughts were, especially if you've also seen the original production. How do you think the two of them compared? What is your highlight moment from this show, and what did you think of the performances? Thank you for watching today's video. I hope that you've enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for much more stagey content and more reviews coming very soon. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching. Have a stagey day. Subscribe!